Lena and Marcus had always thought their apartment was ordinary until the night the reflections started moving on their own. At first it was subtle, a blink that didn't match, a smile that came too soon. But soon the mirrors weren't just showing them anymore. Something else was learning, waiting, and watching. And by the time they realized the truth, it was already too late. I started noticing it 2 weeks ago, while brushing my teeth. The mirror in front of me fogged from the shower steam, but I could still see enough to catch the first wrong moment. I leaned forward to spit, and the reflection didn't move with me. It hesitated, as if it didn't understand what I was doing right away. Only after a heartbeat did it mimic the motion. The delay was small, so small that someone else might excuse it as imagination. But once something unnatural is seen, it can't be unseen. That tiny fracture in reality etched itself into my mind like a scar. I stayed there frozen, breathing hard, staring at my own face, staring back. The reflection's breathing didn't match mine either. It looked like it inhaled slower, deeper, intentional, as if it enjoyed watching me panic. I forced myself to laugh it off that morning, telling myself maybe I was tired, maybe the steam blurred the movement. The brain loves to fill in gaps, distort things under stress. I left the bathroom quickly and avoided mirrors for the rest of the day. But even without looking, I could feel the awareness of it, like someone watching me through glass. Every step I took in my apartment, I sensed that another version of me somewhere inside that rectangle of reflection was waiting, still and patient. At night, I covered the bathroom mirror with a towel and slept facing the wall. But I woke up twice, drenched in sweat, convinced something was inches from my face, studying my closed eyes. The next morning, I tried again, telling myself I needed to disprove it. I peeled the towel away slowly, expecting to see a normal reflection following my movement exactly. But what I found instead was worse. It waited. My body moved first. My head tilted experimentally, and then the reflection caught up after a delay, small but visible. Once you know what a perfect mirror should do, anything less is a violation. Something that is supposed to follow cannot lead or lag without reason. I stood there staring at myself, feeling like I was not looking at a copy, but at someone wearing my shape. For the rest of the day, I avoided eye contact with anything shiny, empty picture frames, dark windows at night, my phone screen when it turned black. All became threats. I started brushing my teeth looking down at the sink instead of the glass. I moved around the apartment keeping my gaze low. But fear works like gravity. It pulls your attention exactly to the thing you want to avoid. By evening, I couldn't resist checking again. I told myself I needed to know if it was still there or if it was a one-time episode. I lifted my face toward the mirror with a held breath and watched as my reflection smiled first, a wide, slow grin stretching across my face while mine stayed frozen and horrified. I stayed away from mirrors the entire next day, moving through the apartment cautiously, like someone navigating a building full of landmines. I kept my head down when passing anything with a shine. Even the back of spoons or the dark surface of the TV when it was off made my skin prickle. But hiding from reflections only proved one thing. They exist whether I look or not. I could feel them the way you can feel a presence in a room before turning on the light. It wasn't just fear. It was awareness. Something inside those surfaces was awake. I tried to distract myself by cooking, cleaning, scrolling through my phone, anything to occupy my mind. But every time my screen went dark, my face returned with that stretched, eager patience. I started keeping the brightness high and my phone angled down so it couldn't catch my full face. Even then, I sensed the reflection waiting beneath the glare like an animal crouched behind glass. The house began to feel divided into two versions, the one I physically walked through and the one where my reflection lived, parallel, mimicking, sometimes failing, sometimes getting too confident. I wondered if the delay was a glitch, a learning phase, a rehearsal, and if it was learning, what would happen once it learned enough. By late afternoon, the paranoia had turned physical. I felt watched from angles that shouldn't have had eyes. I moved past the kitchen window too quickly and caught only a smear of my own shape in the glass, but the wrongness of its stillness made my chest tighten. My body had already moved, but the reflection had remained looking outward, as if something else in there was still finishing its view of the world. When I looked back again, it was perfectly synced, like a child caught doing something forbidden and pretending innocence. My breathing never fully returned to normal. I stopped walking near windows. I unplugged the TV and draped a blanket over it. I washed dishes with my head turned away from the metal faucet. But the fewer places I allowed reflections, the louder the sense of being observed became. The silence in the apartment thickened, like air trying to listen. I sat on the floor at night with every light on, refusing to look up, refusing to catch myself anywhere. Hours passed without movement. My body was still, but inside me thought piled on thought. If reflections lag and then smile ahead of me, what else are they doing when I am not looking? What do they practice when they don't need to pretend? I finally stood to go to bed and walked past the hallway wall where a thin glass picture frame hung with an old photograph inside. I had forgotten about that one. My eye flicked to it for half a second, and in that narrow rectangle of reflected space, the version of me inside was standing closer to the frame than I was in reality, as if it had been waiting right at the edge of the glass for me to look. I couldn't take it anymore without testing it. I needed to know whether the reflection was reacting to me or acting on its own. I woke up before sunrise the next day, when the room was still gray and quiet. I uncovered the bathroom mirror slowly, keeping my eyes closed. I stood there with my head bowed and my fists clenched until my pulse leveled. Then, in one sharp motion, I snapped my eyelids open to catch it off guard. The reflection was already staring back, wide-eyed and alert, as if it had been waiting with its eyes open before mine even lifted. That one detail, its readiness, felt worse than any delay. It didn't follow me. It anticipated me. It knew I would look. Something inside me cracked in that moment. There is a difference between something copying you and something thinking ahead of you. One is imitation. The other is intention. The reflection was no longer learning my behavior. It was predicting it. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. My chest burned with restraint. The reflected version of me didn't move either. It watched with a kind of hunger. Not physical hunger, but the hunger of something trying to step closer to being real. I started doing subtle tests through the day. I twitched a finger suddenly, without planning it. The reflection twitched at the exact same time. I jerked my head sideways without warning. Perfect sync. But when I did something deliberate, something planned, it often blinked first, or adjusted before I had finished deciding to move. It reacted not to my actions, but to my intentions. That was when I felt truly invaded, as if my thoughts were not trapped inside my skull anymore but leaking into the glass world. By noon, I was trembling constantly. I kept expecting to catch it doing something forbidden again. I hooked my laptop camera to a recording app and turned it on so I could look without being seen directly. But the reflection in the webcam feed behaved perfectly. Not a second of lag, not a flicker of independence. Watching through a screen felt like the reflection knew it was being monitored and was holding its performance tight. It wasn't until I switched off the laptop and the black screen appeared, reflective in its dark glass, that I caught the truth again. In the dead, unlit surface of the laptop lid, my reflection blinked slowly with a strange satisfaction before my real eyelids even twitched. It watched me like someone who already knew the next line of a script I hadn't decided to speak. That night, I lay awake in my bed with all mirrors covered, but the thought kept replaying until it became unbearable. If it is predicting me now, what happens once it finishes? What does something do after it knows how to be you completely? And just before sleep dragged me under, the worst fear surfaced. Maybe it isn't learning to imitate me. Maybe it is waiting to replace me. I stopped using lights at night because every bright surface created a chance to see a reflection. I moved through the apartment like someone hiding from a sniper, avoiding glossy tiles, avoiding appliances, avoiding anything that could show a human shape. I draped towels over picture frames, table glass, even the clock face. The apartment looked like the aftermath of a crime scene, everything covered and suffocated. I should have felt safer that way. But instead, the silence grew heavier, like the reflections were still there beneath the cloth, leaning in close, waiting for the moment I slipped up and exposed them again. Food lost taste. Time lost shape. I walked with my hand against the wall like a blind man, only looking at the floor, never straight ahead. But when you remove sight, imagination fills in the gaps. I could feel it staring through the layers, pressing its face against the underside of the fabric, like someone breathing through a mask. I played sound on my phone to drown the silence, but even then I kept catching myself glancing at the black sides of the device, terrified to see that other version peering back. At one point, I brushed against a mirror I had covered, and I swear I felt warmth through the sheet, as if something was standing on the other side, body heat bleeding through. I yanked my hand away and backed across the room until my back hit the wall. The sheet remained still, but I couldn't stop picturing what was standing behind it, forehead touching the glass, lips curled, waiting for me to give it another look. Sleep happened in fragments, jolting awake every time I felt watched. I started hearing small sounds, clicks, almost like fingernails tapping lightly on glass from the covered areas. Maybe it was the fabric settling, maybe it was my nerves, but it sounded too intentional, like a reminder that it was still there. Once I heard what sounded like a slow drag across a mirror's surface, like skin or bone sliding along it. I didn't investigate, I didn't move. I lay stiff and cold until sunrise. The worst moment came in the kitchen. I was filling a pot with water, head turned down, making sure not to look at the metal surface. The faucet ran clear and steady. Then I noticed there was no sound of the reflection world water, only one stream. I lifted my eyes the smallest fraction, and in the curved steel of the kettle beside the sink, I saw my reflected face already looking up, fully upright, staring into that surface, while my real head was still bowed. It wasn't delayed or predictive this time. It was acting independently, no longer tied to my position or posture. That realization settled into me like ice. The reflection was not just ahead of me or behind me anymore. It was separate. It had its own posture, its own timing, its own awareness. It was no longer a copy. It was now another presence wearing my shape. I woke up the next morning with a decision that didn't feel like courage, but more like inevitability. Avoiding it wasn't stopping anything. Covering mirrors didn't stop the sense of presence. If anything, hiding had given the reflection time to grow bolder in the dark. I decided I would uncover just one surface and look directly, not to confront it, not to win, but to finally see what I was actually dealing with. The longest mirror in the apartment stood in the hallway, covered by a heavy blanket since the second day. My hands shook as I walked toward it. The blanket didn't move, but the air around it felt dense and watched, like something on the other side was already standing just as close, waiting with head tilted against the glass. I stood there for a long time, breathing in and out, trying to decide if seeing the truth was worse than not knowing it. My fingers closed around the blanket and I pulled it down with one swift motion before I could panic. The mirror was clear, bright, and horrifyingly normal. My reflection stood exactly where I stood. Perfect mimicry, no delay, no anticipation. For a moment, I almost sobbed in relief. Maybe the thing had passed, maybe sleep deprivation had twisted me, maybe the mind invents demons when there is too much silence. But then, in that stillness, my reflection blinked, too slow, too deliberate, and a thin smile crawled across its face before mine moved. The skin at the corner of its lips tore slightly as it stretched, like something wearing flesh that didn't fit. My mouth remained still. My reflection's smile widened further, split skin deepening, teeth bright against the tearing. I staggered back, but the reflection did not step with me. It stayed near the glass, closer than I had been, hands lifting slowly into view, though mine hung useless at my sides. It pressed its palms flat against the inside of the mirror and leaned forward until its forehead touched the glass. A wet fog of breath bloomed against the surface from its side, while my own breath came out cold and distant. My body shook but did not move. It felt like some invisible thread tethered my muscles down while the reflection moved freely, unbound. Then the worst thing happened. I saw movement in the glass that wasn't mine and wasn't the one in front of me. Behind the reflection, deeper inside that mirrored world, more faces were standing in the dark. My faces, layered behind each other like a hallway of me's, all staring forward with the same smile, waiting their turn. I backed away until my spine hit the far wall and covered my face with both hands, unable to think, unable to breathe. When I finally lowered my hands and looked again, the mirror reflected only an empty hallway. My body was still there in reality, but I no longer appeared in the glass. And from inside that silent rectangle, something stood where I should have been. Something with my posture, my height, my outline, waiting with my absence to take my place.